Hello everybody, my name is Chris Ferris and welcome to this video which is all about building your own sound absorbers. Acoustically treating a space has a massive impact on how we perceive sound in that space. Be it listening to speakers or recording a sound source, the principle is still the same. What your goal is to remove the reflections coming off the walls, so what you're hearing is coming from the source and not the source combined with the room. So here's a quick sample of the space that I worked on recently. So you'll hear before and after. The space is empty in both examples, but one has sound absorbers on the wall and the other doesn't. So take a listen. Well, there you have it. So if you want to learn how to build these acoustic panels, keep watching the video. Thank you so much, and I hope you get inspired. So here it is. This is one of the sound absorbers that I built recently. So yeah, it's pretty sexy, right? The whole thing is based around acoustic insulation. So it's a type of insulation you'd be putting in your walls to help soundproof from one space to another. So this is really good sound absorption material, and it makes the perfect base for these acoustic panels. So it's pretty simple, the build. You've got acoustic insulation on the inside. There is an inner frame that kind of holds everything together and gives you something to staple the fabric to. And then on this one, I put this outer border just to kind of finish it off. And it's nice because with the fabric, I didn't need to wrap all the way around. I could just wrap to the side, staple it, and then frame it in with this border. So yeah, this is the design I came up with. So let's dive into the build now, into the materials and the dimensions and actually assembling it. Okay, materials. For the acoustic insulation, Roxul Safe and Sound. For the wood, it's the same lumber for the border and for the inner frame. I'm using 1x3 SPF. This is just construction grade, very cheap, easy to work with. For the fabric, you want something thin, acoustically transparent. So a polyester or a cotton, you don't want to be using something like leather. So you just want it thin and stretchy fabric. For the stain of the border, I'm using a varathane product. This is Gunstock. That's the name of the stain. It's got an orange hue, really nice. And then for the coating, the varathane that you put on the outside, I'm using a clear coat semi-gloss. And then on the back to just keep the acoustic insulation in. It's not necessary, but if you do plan on moving the panels around, it's a good thing to have. Just some hardboard, some 1/8" hardboard that I put on the back. And then for the hangers to hang the panels, I'm using picture frame hangers. Really, really good way to hang these. It makes it really easy to put them in and remove them. So that's the materials. Okay, let's talk dimensions. So you are basing your dimensions around the piece of acoustic insulation. So for the inner frame, 16 inches across, it was about 44 inches long. So I cut my two top pieces, 16 inches exactly, to work with the width. And then for the length, it ended up being about 46 3/8. So the idea is you just want to measure it out, make sure you get the measurements right so you can build an inner frame for that piece of insulation. Now, the dimensions for the border that goes on the outside, once your inner frame is built, you then measure the outside dimensions of that inner frame. Those numbers will now become the inside dimensions of your border. So you measure out that length, and then you're cutting your 45-degree cuts out from that. When you do that, then you create the perfect border. Now there is a catch here. What I ended up having to do is I did one test build, and then I realized once I put the fabric on, I actually didn't have enough space for those corners to line up because that fabric ended up extending the size of that inner border, if that makes sense. So the point here is add 1/8 of an inch to that border, and then that'll give you enough space for the fabric and the staples that go in between the inner frame and that border. So you want to add about about an eighth, but that's how I figured out the dimensions there. And that's the most important stuff with the dimensions. Inner frame, make sure it wraps the acoustic insulation. Border has to wrap the inner frame, but give a little extra space on that border just for your fabric. Okay, so let's discuss the build. So what you want to do is you want to cut all of your material ahead of time. So get all of that lumber cut ahead of time. It makes the assembly really quick. So start with the inner frame. You can see me using a corner clamp here. I definitely recommend corner clamps. So put everything together in the corner clamp. To secure it, I've gone with finishing nails. So a bit of carpenter's glue in the corner, and I'm using finishing nails. So I'll pre-drill some pilot holes, use the nails to hold the whole thing together. So build the inner frames first, get all of the inner frames built. Once those are done, then I moved and I did my borders. So the borders, they construct the exact same way. Use the corner clamp, a bit of glue, and then I'm coming in the sides with the finishing nails. Nice thing about the finishing nails too is I was going for a rustic look with this build, and seeing the nail heads on the outside of those frames, it added to the look. So I really like that. Okay, so outside borders, once you get those constructed, if you're going to be staining and putting a little varathane on them, you will need to sand them down just a bit because they can be a little rough. You don't want to go too crazy because you still want a bit of that roughness. Like, I like seeing some of the bark and stuff, but last thing you want to be doing is touching one of these and getting a splinter. So smooth them out, get them ready, and then for staining, if you've never stained before, pretty much how staining works is you apply the stain to the wood, you let it sit for a certain period of time, and then you wipe off the excess stain. So with this lumber, it's a little harder, the wood, so it took about 10 minutes. I had to do a bunch of tests, but about 10 minutes was the magic time. So I put the stain on, I cover the whole thing, I wait 10 minutes, and then I come with the cloth and I wipe it off. It takes about 24 hours to dry. Now for the varathane, the clear coat, you want to put on about 4 or 5 coats of this stuff. If you've never used varathane before, one thing about it is when it dries, it can be a little bumpy and rough. So to get that nice smooth finish, what you need to do is use a very fine grit sandpaper, so like 2000 or whatever, and then you can even spray it, wet it a little, and that's called wet sanding, and you sand that down. It really smooths it out. You get a nice shine, smooth finish. So that's how that part happens. Now that the borders are done, the inner frame is done, we can start assembly. So first thing we do is we wrap that inner frame with the fabric. So just wrap the fabric around, staple it around the sides, cut off the excess fabric. Then you take the border and you put the border over top of that inner frame. Once it's over top, you come from the inside with some screws to secure that border. So come from the inside, make sure your screws are short enough that they're not going to pierce the border and you have screws sticking out. So the idea is you're just grabbing a bit of that border and then it secures the whole thing and makes it rigid. So borders are on, inner frames together, we throw the piece of insulation in there, and then what I've done here is I've used some hardboard and I've cut some pieces just on the top and bottom just to keep the insulation in place. Not entirely necessary, but I wanted it for this build. So hardboard, I put some nails just around it to secure it, keeps the insulation in place. And then finally, we want to secure the hangers. So the hangers I'm using, I mentioned before, these OOK, they're picture frame hangers. So you put the hoop side on the acoustic panel. And what I did is I brought the hangers down about 6 inches into the panel. Reason being, I want the panels to look like they're floating. I don't want people to see the hanging hardware. If I'd put the hoops at the top, you would have seen the hoops sticking out from the top. So I just slid them down about 6 inches, and that worked great. So that's pretty much the build in a nutshell. So this is the space that I am going to acoustically treat. As you can hear, it's very echoey. Let's see what the panels do. So for the install, As far as figuring out the spacing, what I did is I essentially designed this in such a way that the spacing between the panels was determined by the actual size of the panel. So I wanted a panel, then I wanted a space of wall that was the same width as the panel, then another panel. That's how I designed this. Essentially, the more panels you have, the more absorption you have. So you have to decide how lively and how dead you want your room to sound. Now, for hanging the panels, I definitely recommend, if you can get your hands on a laser level, makes the job really easy. You set that laser where you want all the hooks, everything's gonna hang at the same height. Really helps for getting it all nice and even and symmetrical. For the height of the panel, really that was based off of 8-foot ceiling. I had a 4-foot panel, so 2 foot to the panel, 2 foot, you know, so I wanted it in the center of the wall. Reason being is I'm gonna get the most out of my panel in the center. If I had it lower, you have more surface up top. The opposite if you have it higher. So I put it right in the middle of the wall there. And then for the hangers themselves, they're great. They've got 2 pins that come down on an angle, so you can put them right into the drywall. You don't need to worry about hitting studs, and they anchor themselves right in there, and they're very strong, so that works out great. And then to figure out where the hangers went, it was pretty simple. I figured out where I wanted all of my panels. The center of my panels, I knew that my hoops were 16.5 inches apart, so I found the center, and then I did what is it, 8 1/4 from the center on each side. I think that's how it worked out, and then put the hooks in like that, and that's how I figured. So when I was ready to hang the panels, all the hooks were in place. It was a super simple thing to install. And now here we are with the baffles. A lot of carpet, some furniture, it's gonna help, but you can already hear compared to how it was before. A lot less reflection. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've made it this far, you're a trooper, and I do genuinely appreciate it. Like, subscribe, do all those things they say to do, and I hope you got inspired. Thank you.